Chapter 25, The Church. Now, church officials wanted to establish Roman Catholicism all over Western Europe to have it affect the government and the way things were run. So they did this partially through the effective use of missionaries. And the Catholic influence in every town in Western Europe in particular was huge. The church was the center of just about every village and town. Now, in terms of daily life, the religious ceremonies were very, very important. Almost all people went to Mass, which was the worship service on Sunday, and the church performed a lot of the record keeping in society. For political life, the church helped to govern and were big landowners, because a lot of times people would just give their land to the church sort of as a way to get in good with God, I guess, to make sure that they got into heaven, or if they spent to spend less time in purgatory. So the high officials also advised the kings and the lords, and the lower ones told the people to obey the nobles and the government, because basically it was a relationship that they sort of both benefited from, because then the church could go ahead and count on the support of the nobles. And so the lower level clergy, they would just go ahead and say, hey, you know what, you need to behave if you're a peasant, because basically this is God's plan. It's hard to argue with that if that's going to be your real belief and you actually listen to that sort of stuff. So now, canon laws, they were laws that were set up by the church. They were different than other laws, primarily had to do with church-related things, but priests that did something illegal were generally tried in canon church courts instead. If a person disobeyed canon laws, they could be excommunicated, which meant thrown out of the church and would lose their rights, particularly for the sacrament of communion, which was very, very important for people to undergo. That's the thing with the taking a wafer and drinking wine, symbolizing the Last Supper that before Jesus was crucified, according to Catholic theology. Now, the Inquisition, some people tried to get others to believe things the church did not want them to believe, and the church called them heretics. The church responded by saying trials called the Inquisition, and these were nasty affairs. If a person confessed, they would be punished by whipping or prison, and sometimes, if they did not, the church tortured and killed people. And they justified this by saying, hey, you know what, it's better we go ahead and get you to get to admit to your sins here, where you can actually ask for forgiveness, rather than when you're dead and in hell. So there were attempts at reform. Church members supported the church, and it made them rich, and sometimes that was kind of a bad thing because it got their minds off the Christian faith. Giving a tithe, which was a tenth of the income that they were supposed to get, and that was something everybody was supposed to do. Now, if a bishop died, the noble of the area had the right to appoint someone new, and sometimes appointees actually paid off paid off the noble so they get the job, because this was a pretty good job for a lot of people. Now, the monks of Cluny were a group of very devout monks that pushed the idea that the Pope should appoint all religious officials, not just the nobles, because they realized this was a part of the problem. You were getting these really cruddy religious officials in some areas. Now, Gregory VII, he was in power, and he made a lot of changes, and he felt that he was not only a religious official, but he had a lot of property too. The Pope realized that this was a problem, though, so he banned marriages for bishops, because that way you don't have kids, you don't have people who could inherit anything. And priests, and kicked out of office the people who bribed themselves in. Despite the objections of the nobles and kings, Pope Gregory claimed that the Pope was above the kings and should be allowed to choose religious officials, because the Pope claimed to be led by God directly. Now, friars went into towns, and they were traveling preachers instead of showing themselves off like monks did. And there were two major orders, and they were the friars, and they were the Franciscans. The Dominicans. Franciscans were viewed as these cheerful guys who loved nature, and the Dominicans studied languages so they could preach to different people. And yes, they are the guys. The monks also had some interesting haircuts, but friars, they did have that shaved head look for some of them.